Welcome back. The goal to put astronauts back on the moon by 2024 will demand more speed about acquisition decisions at NASA. Developing a mission-driven procurement workforce is part of that plan. Brian Mullins is Deputy Assistant Inspector General for Audits at NASA. Brian, welcome. Thanks very much for coming on the program. You and your team write in this work. In October 2019, NASA's Office of Procurement began implementing its enterprise-wide workforce transition. What'd you look at as far as what they undertook with that transition, Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Francis. Appreciate you having me on. Glad to talk about our work at the NASA OIG. NASA is working to develop an agile and mission-driven acquisition workforce. It's meant to address expected increases in procurement activity in the very near future, including the planned return to astronauts to the moon by 2024. Central to this initiative is what you were talking about. The agency started in October 2019, started with its Mission Support Future Architecture Program, or MAP, which is an attempt to implement an enterprise-wide workforce transition. The hope is that creating product service lines, effectively groups of similar products across similar locations, the agency can reduce redundant contracts and free up acquisition resources to focus more on critical needs. While these plans appear to follow what we would consider best practices for acquisition management, the effort is in the very early stages and could take up to 5 years to implement, given some cultural changes and things that the agency needs to address along the way. In addition, while NASA policy primarily aligns with federal requirements for acquisition workforce training and certification, we found that the agency relies on several different systems and stakeholders to manage the various certification programs. This reduces NASA's ability to validate the accuracy of certification and training data.
So if you're talking about culture, that's the word of all of what you just said that perked my ears. What is the cultural issue that NASA's acquisition workforce and that the leadership of NASA's acquisition workforce is working on, is up against right now, Brian?
Absolutely. This is about getting all of the data in a more complete, centralized, and usable form. Our body of work at the NASA OIG has shown repeatedly that NASA frequently struggles with attempting to implement agency-wide initiatives. And just not with workforce, but in other areas such as IT governance and infrastructure consolidation. Part of this is driven by the high levels of autonomy given to NASA's mission directorates in major centers located across the country. Historically, NASA procurement actions and award decisions have been made at the center level, which resulted in redundant and duplicative contracts, greater numbers of contracting personnel, and increased administrative costs and actions. As MAP progresses, product service lines are created, critical challenges will be retaining key technical resources and expertise across the to administer highly complex contracts that might be more centralized. You can imagine expertise in procuring custodial services is quite different than procuring rocket fuel.
How is NASA doing at gauging whether the people that it needs to do those different kinds of procurements have the skills they need to do those kinds of procurements? You're right. One type of procurement doesn't require the same kinds of skills as another, but what's the mechanism that they have to keep track of whether their people are getting what they need to do the different kinds of things?
Right. Well, MAP is an across-the-board, enterprise-wide assessment of those skills. And as it progresses and as they complete that, what it will do, it will completely reevaluate the talent that NASA has, look for skill gaps, and then try to find ways to better access the contracting workforce to bring those talented folks on board as quickly as possible.
You refer to one metric or one construct for doing that in this work. You write the agency's migration to the Federal Acquisition Institute training application system is incomplete. What's the risk that the agency takes on in having that transition still in progress or incomplete or whatever the status currently is, Brian?
Yeah, this is a situation based primarily on timing. So this requirement for all acquisition workforce personnel to have their certification and training data in the OFPP system that you mentioned, it's called FATAS. That requirement started in 2014. In 2015, NASA got a waiver so that they could use their own management system instead of the FATAS system due to some IT security concerns that the CIO at NASA had at the time. In 2018, the then CIO found some mitigation plans and approved the transition to the federal system. And although it took a while for NASA to start that. They began that transition in November of 2019 to make that coincide with the current learning cycle, the training requirements for the contracting personnel. What happened was, what we've discovered is this implementation plan is likely to slip. They've had a work stoppage with the contract that they have to implement that, and NASA is pretty uncertain when that may be completed. So the challenge there is it started, they had the right initiative, but basically they ran into some contracting issues, ironically, that are preventing them from fully getting that transition. The other issue that they have, one of the big tasks there, is you have to build user profiles for each of the personnel that are going to be in there. And because NASA has so many contracting officers and contracting officer representatives and other contracting staff, it takes a long time to do that, and NASA is just behind the curve in doing it.
We have about 30 seconds left, Brian. What is the path forward for NASA here?
Yeah, so we still think NASA is fairly well positioned to support the agency's contracting needs given their planned approach and their new operational structure. What we did was recommend that the MAP program progress, and as they do that, we want NASA to finalize and implement its performance metrics dashboard, and we also want them to document contract assignments in a centralized system. And to make sure the workforce is properly trained, we want NASA to utilize the OFPP required certification and training system, and we also want to ensure that contracting professionals who have not met their training requirements are removed from their acquisition duties in a timely manner.
Brian Mullins, thanks very much for joining me. I appreciate your time.
Thanks very much, Francis.